As a resident of Birr and many generations before me, I feel entitled to welcome you all here on behalf of the people of Birr. We are delighted to see you all. We are delighted that you have decided to have your launch of Lex Innocentium 21st century here in Birr. And if I could say for myself also, that I want to thank you for inviting me. It's an honour, and I'm delighted to be here too. As has been pointed out, I was a solicitor here for very many years. I was always interested in history, and in the early 1990s, I became aware that this law had in fact been proclaimed here in Birr, my town. And I became very quickly aware also that the 1300th anniversary of that would occur in 1997. So we got a committee together and we organised a celebration, a very successful, elaborate celebration over a weekend here in Birr in 1997. When that was all over, I said to myself, wouldn't it be great if I was lucky enough to be in a position to study up this law after I retired perhaps, and become to some degree an authority on it. And I was lucky enough, and as you've been told, I did an MA, PhD and all that, and eventually then my book was published in 2020. A lot of people were very good enough to buy this book, but I think not so many of them actually read it. So I decided on something a little bit more accessible, we'll say, and produced this, The Great Law of Birr. So that's the sort of background to the situation. But the focus of my thesis and the focus of the book was to place this law in the history of the laws of war, and in particular those laws which sought to give protection to innocents, that is, non-combatants or civilians, as we would call them, non-arms bearing people. And having gone into it in very considerable detail, I was very surprised to find that our law was in fact the first known law to do that in the Western world. Now, I suppose the real question then is who was responsible for the law? And that was, of course, Adamnan of Iona, the 9th abbot of Iona in succession to St. Columcille. Adamnan is not a well-known person in Ireland today, except in his native Donegal, where he is known as St. Ewan, and also amongst scholars of early Irish history, who know him well, study him well, and have written a lot about him. And in fact, he is one of their, we'll say, favourite subjects. And in 2004, 18 of these scholars met in Iona for a conference in honour of the Adamnan had died 1300 years earlier. That was in 704. And they deliberated there, and they delivered papers, and ultimately they produced a book. And this is the book here, Adamnan of Iona, Theologian, Lawmaker and Peacemaker. And I'll just read for you the first line of the introduction to that book, written by the editor, Jonathan M. Wooding, in the context of him having attended this conference and having listened to 18 different contributions on Adamnan, And this is what he ultimately had to say. Adamnan of Iona was one of the leading churchmen in these islands, that's Ireland and Britain, in the first millennium. Now, if you stop and think about that for a moment, any person who can be called a leading figure in their own day is quite remarkable enough. If they can be called a leading figure in their own century, it is pretty remarkable also. But to be called a leading figure in one's own millennium, I think is quite unprecedented. It's an extraordinary attribution to this man, Adamnan. He went on to say, in the wide reception of his writings and their enduring quality, Adamnan approaches the authority of a father of the church. His works were circulated in Ireland, England, and the continent. His De Locis Sanctus, as one of his books, became a common inclusion in biblical miscellanies. Adamnan's judgments were included in canon law. So he's no minor figure in our history. He is a huge figure and deserves to be much better known. And I am hoping that your input into this now will help to do that. Now, I suppose when we come to assess a figure in history, we can look at that figure's own times. How were they perceived in their own time? We can look at how they were perceived in the centuries after they died, and most importantly of all, we can look on how they can be and should be perceived against the background of this world, this present-day world that we live in. So in his own time, Adamnan was a theologian, a hagiographer, that is, he wrote a wonderful life of St. Columcille, a scholar. He, in fact, has a work on Virgil attributed to him, a statesman. He travelled over to England. He was a personal friend of King Alfred of Northumbria. He was sent by the High King of Ireland over there to retrieve captives that had been taken from Ireland by Alfred's predecessor. He brought them back. So he was a man of the world. Apart from being, we'll say, the head of a confederation of monasteries all over the northern half of Ireland and Scotland. So he was a very, very major figure in the Ireland of his day. Of course, a saint, and recognised as a saint for centuries. But above all, I suppose, from our point of view, he was a lawmaker. So that is, we say, Adamnan in his own time. In the ensuing centuries, Adamnan, his writings obviously went all over Europe. In the Irish Annals and other sources, he is very often pointed out as the person who delivered the women of the Gaels from bondage. He was seen as a man who made a law for women. And until relatively recently, that was primarily how he was looked upon. But in the modern world, ever since really, I mean, when we think of it, it was only 1949 when the Geneva Conventions, and then there was a protocol in 1977 when the idea and the concept of the innocent, the non-arms bearing person and their right to immunity from violence when that was adopted by, I think it's 177 nations. And it's only now that we're getting around to viewing Adamnan in the prism, really, of that he is the father of actually what we call jus in bello, on the whole question of what is right behaviour during the course of war. So this is what we have now. This is what we're aware of now. And when we look at our modern world and measure him against that, his law has become grimly relevant only over the last few years. We've had Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the horrors that we have witnessed there. We've had, or we not have had, we are having at the moment Gaza. And I don't know, but I mean, in the worst nightmares that I could ever imagine, would never have imagined the horrors that are being perpetrated against the people of Gaza at the present time. It's beyond comprehension. It's quite extraordinary. And I think our children and grandchildren will say to us, this happened during your time. This happened on your watch. What did you do about it? How could you let something like this happen? Now, of course, we're all actually quite powerless, and it's frightfully frustrating for all of us. But this, you're doing your bit, here and now. This is part of your response, and I congratulate you on that, and I wish you every possible success with your endeavours. What I see you as doing is embracing Adamnan's legacy, and it needs to be made more well known all over, not just Ireland, but all over the world. So I'm going to finish, if I may. I'm going to read for you the first paragraph of Adamnan's law. And when these words were first, when they rang out across the plain of Birr, as it's described in the law, it was the first legislative expression of the non-combatant, the innocent, and the innocent's rights. The word first in a Western European context. And this is what he had to say. This is the enactment of the law of Adamnan in Ireland and in Britain. The immunity of the Church of God and her familia and her insignia and her sanctuaries and all the property, animate and inanimate, and her law-abiding laymen with their legitimate spouses who abide by the will of Adamnan and a proper wise and holy confessor. And then the crunches. The enactment of the law of Adamnan enjoys a perpetual law for clerics, females, and innocent youths until they are capable of killing a person and of taking their place in the tribe and until their first armed conflict is known. So that was out of the mind of Adamnan, and through the power of his personality, the law for international humanitarian law is based on was proclaimed in Birr, no further than maybe 200 metres from where we're sitting today. And I think that's a wonderful thing to celebrate. And thank you all.